Okay, this is part 7 in a series of lectures about the Belle epoch, the golden age of Europe in the 1800s, going into around the time of World War I. That's really sort of, an attempted suicide by Europe. And the point of it all was the art of the 1800s was magnificent. It was as good or better than the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance of the 1400s and 1500s. Okay, so we were sort of closing out the Roman Empire. The book of Revelation has been written into the Bible with all kinds of doomsday predictions. And Rome is sacked by the barbarians. Okay, the sack of Rome. The place is looted, pillaged. The women are violated. Here's another painting of the sack of Rome by Joseph Noel Silvestri. They tear down the statues, Rome was a brutal, cruel place, but it did achieve magnificent things in architecture. It did have a literature. It did have libraries. The aristocrats owned a lot of books, and mankind was progressing intellectually. There was pretty good engineering and aqueducts. The religious people, like St. Augustine, were distraught about the fall of Rome. He wrote a book about it, The City of God. Earlier than that is the story of the conversion of St. Augustine. And he was sitting out in the backyard, and he had been trained in rhetoric. He knew about Cicero, for example. And he had been a little bit wild and debauched as a young man. And he had a vision while out in the backyard that he should tolle legge, pick up the Bible and read, And he just randomly opened it to Romans 13:13, and it said, "Let us walk properly as in the day, not in a night of orgies and drunkenness, not in sexual immorality or debauchery, but clothe yourself in the word of the Lord Jesus Christ." And then he got serious about the church and religion. Ended up being quite a writer. Here is St. Jerome, another famous writer of the early church. And believe me, we're moving into chivalry, but this is sort of the turning point here. The vision of St. Jerome, that he went before Christ for judgment, and he said, "Lord, I am a Christian." And the Lord said, "No, you are not. You lie. You are a Ciceronian," because he loved to read Cicero. And at that point, too, he had a transition where Cicero was the greatest writer of all the Romans. Some say the greatest speaker of all time. At that point, he decided to commit himself to Christianity and the Lord. He later translated the Vulgate Bible, into common Latin. Here's just another painting of St. Jerome and little discussion of his vision and what happened. Here's another painting of St. Jerome, and here he is, in the desert. He was tempted by Venus, by women and all their charms. One of the Cupids is still aiming an arrow at him. He clings to the cross. He beats his chest with a rock. He's got on the blue tunic of repentance. Okay, so he's going to go for it to be a holy man and translate the Bible. Here's the Great Angel of Revelation by William Blake, 1805. So there were pretty strong religious feelings here. And now we see the aftermath. We see the aqueduct ruins near Rome. This painting by Thomas Cole, the great landscape artist of the Hudson River School. Okay, that's what you get when you get rid of meritocracy and you have a place taken over by barbarians. Here is the Pont du Gard Roman Aqueduct, okay, by Hubert Robert, 1786. Okay, so that one's a little earlier, the painting, but still, again, it's the point of the Roman ruins. It takes a lot of knowledge, effort, and skill to maintain these things. So you need an educated public if you're going to maintain aqueducts and electricity and all this modern stuff we take for granted. Now, some of the lucky people in antiquity would have their own place, kind of rural, self-sufficient. Here's a happy rural family by William Bouguereau, the great French artist of the 1800s. Okay, some guys were not so lucky to have it rural, living with their family, and here is St. George fighting the dragon. Cheval is the French word for horse. Chivalry is like horsemanship. And a chevalier is a nobleman with knights on horses. So chivalry is associated with Catholic knights on horseback. And it has a very strong sense of honor. And you have a lady who you protect her honor. Then there's King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. They're all supposed to be relatively equal. And duty, honor, service, country, courtly manners, piety. Thomas Malory, the very purpose of a knight is to fight on behalf of his lady. Here he is, St. George, protecting her from the dragon. Okay. Yeah, all this stuff about female equality is nonsense, okay? Females have the physical strength of a 5th grade or 6th grade boy. They are not in the ballpark of male physical strength, and the world's a rough, dangerous place. In civilized, safe areas, a woman can walk the streets freely, but most places aren't civilized and safe, so it's not that safe for them. The guy goes out and fights. Look what happened in Ukraine. When there's a Ukrainian war, the men go off to meet their doom. The women flee the country, okay? That's not the same behavior from the men and the women. I noticed too with my girlfriend, when she has her cycle once a month, she can't do any exercise either. She can just go real slow because we sometimes go exercise together. So, how is somebody who has the strength of a 5th or 6th grader and is even incapacitated for part of a week or a week every month going to have the same physical strength as a guy? There's no way. There's no way, okay? Now here is the Lady of the Lake, and King Arthur is getting his sword there. Here's King Arthur, illustrated by N.C. Wyeth. Here's King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table with a vision of the Holy Grail, and who will be able to get the Holy Grail? Only somebody who makes themselves worthy, and though Lancelot is the best knight, he gets himself into too much mischief with the ladies, so he's not considered worthy. Only Sir Galahad makes himself worthy enough to find the Holy Grail. Each knight, has his vigil, has his duty, has his mission. Okay, by John Petty. USA needs to return to noble masculinity, or it will soon cease to exist as we know it. Okay, so here is the accolade for this knight. Here is the dedication. These are magnificent paintings by Edmund Leighton. He's the greatest painter of chivalry. Came out of England in the 1800s, a disciple of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood. Here's a Lady of Shalott looking kind of sad by William Waterhouse. Oh, I forgot to include Ophelia, painted by John Everett Millay. I should have included that. That's a magnificent painting. Okay, here's My Fair Lady by Edmund Leighton. Kind of reminded me of Dr. McDougall and his wife Mary. Okay. Back in the day, there was a church and society to kind of get women to behave. Nowadays, there's nothing to make them behave. The churches, organized church, has fallen apart and become a disgrace. Society has become a chaos led by atheistic Darwinism. And divorce court totally encourages women to file for divorce, so they file for 80% of divorce, and the family is falling apart in the Western world. Here is the old bard, kind of like me, ostracized out in the corner. And, meanwhile, they're talking all the high-fat, phony stuff. But the bards maintained the culture and the civilization of the people. So they were very valuable to society. Most people were illiterate. And so the stories of the bard and the music of the bard telling about the past. And it's very important for people to hear about their heroes because they're inspired by the courage and the greatness of their ancestors. And it also helps remind them what is true and what is important. And Goethe had talked about that too, about what a jerk a lot of these revisionist historians were who tried to deny the great historic actions of their ancestors. And the young people learn from that, and they have a shared civic pride in the good things that their ancestors did, and that's valuable to a community. Okay, here's King Charlemagne, and King Charlemagne is, doing what he can to unite what we know as Europe, and he saw himself as a continuation of the Roman emperors. And we're starting to see here, like the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so the great King Charlemagne, Charles the Great. And he did a lot for education. He got eloquent over there, and they had, you see eloquent at the Montessori's. Okay. And a lot of people realize how great, a lot of these people were in the Middle Ages. When you look at the Enlightenment would look back to the ancient Greeks for inspiration and tales of greatness, but the Romanticism, to a large extent, they look back at the Middle Ages and chivalry, and were inspired by it. So the 1800s was in many ways a great revival time for Christianity, with the Catholic revival in England in particular, with the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood artists in England in particular, John Everett Millay, with them being supported by John Ruskin. So some of the glamour and danger of the times of chivalry were the knights having to fight for the honor and safety of a lady, a damsel in distress. So here's one by Frank Dixie. Here's another one by Arthur Hughes, Overthrowing the Rusty Knight. There's the Rusty Knight, down over like the troll knocked off the Billy Goat's Bridge into the water stream. Here is the four princesses who find Lancelot sleeping. So there was a lot of romance in the stories of the Knights of the Round Table, and some people claim that when they were first written by the English, they were relatively focused on chivalry and the knights fighting, but that when the French got involved, they came up with all these romantic versions of the stories. And here is the great Lancelot, but he just can't help himself. He's falling for Guinevere, and Guinevere loves Arthur dearly, but her hormones, her hypergamy, are telling her that Lancelot's looking good. Not good for the kingdom, not good for Arthur, not good for anybody. Here's Tristan and Isolde, who accidentally drank the magic potion that made them unavoidably attracted to each other. He was only supposed to transport her, not to fall in love with her, but Tristan and Isolde fell in love. And now King Mark's not too happy about it, going to cause problems. Beautiful painting again by Edmund Leighton. And so you look at this painting, and it's beyond good. It's magnificent. What do you see? Like one masterpiece after another. Romeo and Juliet again, Frank Dixie, and here is Abelard and Eloise, the most dramatic couple of the 1200s, of the time of scholasticism. He was the greatest Aristotle scholar in the world. She was his student, but they fell in love. They had a baby together. Her family was not happy about it and had Abelard castrated. He wasn't allowed to marry her and announce it publicly because he would lose his job as a professor at that time. The big, sad romance tragedy of the late Middle Ages. Here's a beautiful lady stitching a flag. Here's another lady, the king and the beggar maid. So, like John Zerka had said, men are much more romantic than a woman is. The king will marry a poor lady, whereas a wealthy woman would not marry a poor man. You're not going to see that. And in Christianity, one of the nice things about it is everybody's welcome and everybody can find their own place, whatever it is. So here's a young mother, just has her baby, looking very happy, but also, concerned about the responsibility. Here's a nun walking by. Perhaps she's jealous. She looks like she's happy too, and it's a beautiful scene. And Christianity celebrates the family. It's the opposite of modernism, which does everything it can to go against the heterosexual Christian family. Here's Two Crowns by Frank Dixie in 1900. The king sees Jesus Christ on the cross, and hopefully he'll remember that the country has those two crowns. And it's good to have a religion separate from that of the ruler so that there is something to appeal to and that humans are seen as intrinsically valued, having rights. Without that, the ruler becomes the equivalent of a godlike character on earth. Do whatever they want to the poor proles. Here is Saint Elizabeth. She did have children. She was a daughter of a king, but she dedicated much of her life to helping the poor. She joined the secular order of the Franciscans. And again, Christianity makes it possible for a person to do all these things. Like my mother, she was a busy matriarch of the family, but she was on the board of directors of an orphanage. She was a minister of care in the church, and she was always doing nice things. And she would enjoy stuff like that, so that's good. Okay, here's Lady Godiva with her husband, the Earl of Coventry, and she felt had made the taxes too high. She spoke up for the poor, and he said, hey, if you want to get me to repeal it, then you got to ride naked through town on a horse, double bareback. And she did. Okay, so it's Lady Godiva, painted by John Coulter. Here is Galahad. He finds himself in a monastery, And this was a scene in the Monty Python and the Holy Grail movie, and he must maintain his own chastity so that he can keep himself worthy for the Holy Grail, which he seeks to find. That is his quest. Here's a painting. I like the Celtic cross in the back, and he's getting his belt tightened. Hopefully nothing else other than that. And he's going to go find that Holy Cross by Herbert Gustav Schmaltz, 1881. Here is Sir Galahad again. Now he has a vision of the angels, trying to find that Holy Grail. The Holy Grail that can heal anything. If only it could have healed King Arthur. King Arthur died, and he's sort of a bit of a Christ-like figure. Will he come again? We don't know. This painting by William Scott Belle. There's another painting of the Death of King Arthur by James Archer. In times of peril, family is escaping here by the riverway. Reminds one of Venice. And now I'm going to show you some beautiful Gothic Cathedral paintings. This is by Karl Schinkel. Karl Schinkel was a German artist, and he was really more of an architect than an artist, but he liked to do both. He had seen the paintings of Caspar David Friedrich, and they were magnificent. He's like, gosh, I don't think I could ever convey emotion like that in a painting, but I certainly can draw buildings well, because he was an architect as well. So here's a Gothic cathedral by the church. And, it's rather a Gothic cathedral by the river. It's rather extraordinary that back in those days, in the 1300s, 1400s, they made the most magnificent buildings ever made in the history of the world, better than the buildings of the modern world. It's because when you got Christianity on your side, creativity just follows. When you're trying to do things the best you can for all of mankind, you create beautiful things. Beautiful literature, beautiful art, beautiful music. And that's why Christianity is far superior to all other cultures ever on the history of the world, because it generates all that magnificent art, music, literature, sculpture, architecture. So here is a Gothic cathedral on a hill, also by Karl Schinkel. Again, rather beautiful. Here is a castle by the river, again by Karl Schinkel. There's a stag with the big antlers, kind of impressive. Did a magnificent job of combining it with the scenery, the landscape, the sailboat, the sunset. It's just beautiful. Here is the Gothic Cathedral by a rock, by Mir. And again, it's rather spectacular, the landscape and the cathedral on a hill, the city on a hill, that same concept which we often see in Christianity, going back to the Acropolis, a city on a hill, a righteous, good, noble city on a hill. Here's a medieval city on a river by Karl Schinkel again. Usually cities are near a river, they need the water. Okay, here's a tournament and the knights are rushing towards each other to joust. Now here is Hamlet in the play scene, looking back at the king to gauge his reaction. There's Gertrude. Hamlet is with Ophelia. And again, I wish I had got that John Everett Millais painting of Ophelia. Okay, but there it is, John Everett Millais painting Ophelia. You can look it up. It's a magnificent painting. Here's a jousting tournament by N.C. Wyeth of the two knights. Knights of Christ by Jan van Eyck. Unfortunately, peace can't last forever. And first of all, here is the young king, the prince, displayed to the public. And in a later scene, on his day of his wedding, he's called to war. The leader of the guard is telling him, you must come with us. So, not much of a wedding night. Here is the man being told he's got to sail out. The boat's waiting for him down there. And this painting has a little bit of a double meaning. She's tracing the outline of her lover to remember him while he's gone. The ships are waiting below. But you see this shadow, and it's a little bit of a scary looking shadow. What does that represent? Does it represent one of these stone little mini pillars near one of these little mini windows? Or does it represent a knight's headgear? Okay, is that his buddy waiting for him to go? Or is that another guy who's going to be taking her when he's gone? It ain't easy saying goodbye. All right, now here is an ambiguity, is part of what makes the painting interesting. Here is The Spirit of War by Jasper Crosby. So these are the knights heading out from the castle. They're in full armor with their flags. Rather beautiful landscape to go with it. Okay, here's Frederick William Burton. This was considered the favorite painting ever made by an Irish artist. Meeting on the turret stairs, saying goodbye on the turret stairs. You know, who knows if he's coming back at all. So it's very sad. Godspeed. Edmund Layton again as she ties a garter to his arm and wishes him well. They're headed out on foot, perhaps to the Crusades, perhaps to fight some other barbarian invader. And here's all the knights getting ready to go. There's their ladies helping them get their equipment all set on the horse. Departure of the Knights by Edward Burne-Jones. He's another one of the pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood artists of England in the mid-1800s. Okay, so that's it. I hope you enjoyed that.